Hey everybody, I'm Chris White with Emerging Civil War, and I'm standing at Carnton, which is in Franklin, Tennessee. This is a great site hosted by the Battle of Franklin Trust. They own and operate this site. It's part of the November 1864 Battle of Franklin, one of those famous actions between John Schofield, the famed John Schofield, everyone should know that name, and John Bell Hood. And all joking aside, you should know that name if you know anything about the American Civil War. So I'm joined by Kris Mackowski. Kris, Carnton's a pretty cool place to visit. This is a wartime structure. What happened out here on this porch?
This porch is really one of the most legendary or iconic locations in the whole Civil War, because after the Confederate Army makes its charges toward the federal line outside of Franklin, thousands of casualties as a result of that, including a number of Confederate generals who are then brought here overnight after the battle and the following morning, and they're laid out on this porch. And so anybody who knows anything about the story of the Battle of Franklin, they've heard the story of the dead Confederate generals who are laid out on the porch. Perhaps the most famous of them, Patrick Cleburne, the Irishman who had once upon a time advocated for the release of slaves to fight for the Confederacy. He was poo-pooed in that, and some say that killed his career. But there's no doubt the man is absolutely the best division commander, perhaps in the entire Confederate Army, as Eric Jacobson argued earlier. And then with the other generals who are buried here, I can't rattle them all off the top of my head, but I'm sure you can.
I think it's Otho Strahl, John Adams. I don't think States Right Gist makes it over to here.
Although he does get killed.
Yeah, he is killed here. So we have 6 generals who were either killed or mortally wounded in the battle on the Confederate side, and as many as 14 that are wounded. So the cost of leadership here on the Confederate level is going to be high. There's a lot of what you know in the Civil War of lead by example. Whenever you're leading by example in the Civil War, especially if you're an officer, a field grade officer who would be a major, a lieutenant colonel, or a colonel, you would be out in front of your regiment, as would your line officers be out in front of their companies. Those would be captains, or if you don't have a captain in your company, a lieutenant leading from the front. And that's a very dangerous place to be. When they would halt, they would all get behind the line so that they would not be in the firing line or in the way of the range there whenever the Confederate or Union forces start to exchange volleys. But this is a very dangerous place to be. Hiram Granberry, who is one of Patrick Cleburne's brigade commanders, is killed over near the Carter House, as is Patrick Cleburne himself. Over on this side of the line, this is what they call the eastern flank today, or the eastern side of the Franklin battlefield. Here at Carnton, this is where William Wing Loring's division would make his attack across the fields on the other side of the house, the front side of Carnton. William Wing Loring is an interesting fellow. He tried to fight in the Texas Revolution, and his parents went and grabbed him and brought him back to Florida. Then he tried to fight in the Seminole Wars. He fought in the Mexican-American War. He fought in the American Civil War, the Mormon War, and then went over to Egypt. His nickname was Give 'em Blizzards, because he would bellow that for some reason when he went into battle. Lost his arm during the Mexican-American War, and was actually the colonel outranking Robert E. Lee before the American Civil War, and never went to West Point. William Wing Loring is going to be in charge of the mounted infantry, the U.S. Mounted Infantry, which is an interesting unit. So he sees all kinds of action, but his men would have fought over on this side, crested a knoll, and then they would start to take artillery fires. They start to press their advantage, or disadvantage as it were, here at Franklin towards the Union lines. On the Union side, you would have John Schofield's army, who would be ensconced around Franklin at places like the Carter House, which is famous, and you can go see those. The Battle of Franklin Trust owns and operates that facility, and the American Battlefield Trust helped preserve some land over there. That is going to be the center of the hurricane here. Not the eye of the hurricane, believe me. It's going to be where it touches down, and it's an impressive place to go along the Columbia Pike. And we were over there earlier today. We might put some assets in there. Kris, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Carter House real fast and what happened over there?
Sure. The Carter House really does become the center of the storm. It's where landfall happens, if we're going to use Chris's metaphor. There had been a semicircular federal formation protecting Franklin so that Schofield could get his army across the bridge. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't panicked, but he was bottlenecked. And so this defense is really to hold the Confederates off while the Federates make that movement. He's also going to have a forward advance line, and that's going to sort of serve as the tripwire as the Confederates advance up the Columbia Pike, hit that tripwire. They're going to fall back to the Carter House area. That's where landfall happens. Big, huge fight. And basically, the whole Confederate line is focusing in on that because of that semicircular nature of the Federal position, because of the bends of the Harpeth River. It funnels the Confederates in and concentrates them. And that's why that becomes such a desperate, desperate battle. The Federals manage to just barely hold on. They've got very shallow works there. They've got fresh troops that have to come in and bolster the position. And finally, Hood comes this close to breaking through and has to fall back. And that really is going to bring things to an end after dark at the end of the day of the battle. Got a little wind coming up here on the porch. So it becomes this sort of maelstrom. And Kris, the stunning casualty totals as a result of this battle, it's the death ride of the Army of Tennessee.
Yeah, what the idea was, and we probably should have said this at the beginning of the video, was that John Bell Hood was trying to do what a lot of the Western Confederate generals would do throughout the war, and that was sever supply lines. So the Western Confederacy is a vast place. It goes across the Mississippi River, trans-Mississippi, trans means across, and it would go all the way, ironically, into North Carolina, which is really the east. But the Western theater is massive, so as you are moving Union armies down into the Southern Confederacy, what is going to become tenuous are going to be the supply lines. So John Bell Hood, who lost Atlanta in a series of actions around Atlanta in the summer of 1864, is going to retreat up into northern Alabama and eventually pitch this idea to move up into Tennessee, maybe take back the state capital of Nashville, and then move off into Ohio and maybe go help Robert E. Lee's army. I mean, it's fanciful at best. But what he's really trying to do is draw troops away from the deep South, specifically William T. Sherman's troops, and hopefully cutting some of their supply lines, or tenuous supply lines. So Sherman is going to send some forces up towards Franklin and into Nashville. Ulysses S. Grant will order men over there as well. So it's going to be a lot of moving parts. And eventually Schofield's army, as they're trying to pull back towards Nashville, kind of get cornered along the Franklin here, just about the time they're about to pull back and head up towards Nashville, which is about 20 miles north of Franklin. Hood at 4 o'clock in the afternoon makes that attack, and it is going to be just a maelstrom around the Carter House and other parts of the line. The Confederates do break the Union lines. There is a lot of vicious fighting, and it'll be a close fought action. But in the end, John Bell Hood's forces will be severely wounded, but still keep pressing on towards Nashville, where he makes the boneheaded mistake of sitting there and tempting George Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga, to come out and finish the job at what had started here under John Schofield.
And as we talked about that fight around the Carter House, one of the things that I found cool as we've been here is Updike's Tigers, who I mentioned earlier, fresh troops come in, and if you look at the post-battle accounts, he comes in on a velvet pillow carried by angels and saves the Union Army, and there's a choir. That's not what happens here at all, Kris. Updike, his men are important, but maybe he's not the savior of the battlefield.
Well, it's like a lot of battlefields. You have one or two people telling their story, and sometimes that gets picked up, and then it's going to be taken off by other people, and it's going to balloon. Perfect example is Nathan Bedford Forrest. You know, there are so many stories about Nathan Bedford Forrest that are untrue, but they're gospel because someone wrote it in a book. But then the person before them didn't cite it, but they wrote it in a book, and so on and so forth. So that kind of happens around here, and it was interesting to see. It's like the laudanum with John Bell Hood. Was Hood, a drug addict? Was he an alcoholic? Some people made those charges. Was he just a bad general? I mean, you could look at different things, but John Bell Hood is trying to do something here. He's trying to make something happen. He's not high. He's not drunk. He is making lucid decisions with the information he has at hand. And always remember that. We know a lot more than they ever did at the time of the battle. But unfortunately for the Confederate Army of Tennessee, this is going to be almost their siren song. They still have a few more battles left in them, but they're bleeding out at a rapid pace.
The desperation of Franklin is a reflection of the desperation of the whole campaign. As Kris mentioned earlier, this is a Hail Mary pass, and it's going to get dropped in the end zone. And I think that's the desperation of that is really kind of what echoes through through time. Standing here on this iconic porch, this iconic place, there's a lot to see in Franklin now. Battlefield preservation has allowed for battlefield conservation and restoration. Come to the Carter House, come to Carnton, come to Rippeville down at Spring Hill. There's plenty to see, and just many, many facets of the history here at Franklin that you can explore. Kris, come on back in so that we can wave goodbye to everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. Kris White, Kris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.